This is Garden Variety, a horticulture podcast from Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm Charity Nebbe. Spring is the perfect time to plant fruit trees, bushes, vines, and brambles. It will be a while before you can pick your homegrown harvest, but we can offer some guidance when it comes to picking the best cultivars. Randall Vos, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist, is here to do just that. Hello, Randall.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for being here. And Randall, of course, this time of year, I've got a big stack of catalogs full of tempting things that I would like to buy if I go to the lawn and garden center. Same thing happens. So how reliable, when I look at all of those pictures, when I read all of those descriptions, how reliable are the hardiness zone ratings? Can I believe what I see?
Some people are kind of glass half full people and glass half empty. And I'd say most of the catalogs are glass half full kind of situations where they look at it in a very favorable situation. But when I generally look at some of these catalogs, I sometimes just automatically take a hardiness zone off of them just because, there's two different factors we're thinking about here. Is the plant going to live? And is the plant going to bear fruit? And they might live in slightly colder temperatures than they will bear fruit in, but the whole point is for them to bear fruit. So I always take them with a grain of salt, to be honest with you.
Okay, that's good advice. What factors do you look at? I mean, I know that you have a depth of knowledge that we don't have, but when you're reading those descriptions, what are the factors that we really need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, I like disease resistance. It's really tough to control diseases on a small scale. I mean, it's difficult on a large scale too, but when you have just a few plants here or there, you can't really give as easily crop specific pest management. And so the biggest thing I look for is disease resistant. If the varieties are not disease resistant, I'm not going to plant them in my home garden situation just because the chance of success lessens if they're more prone to diseases. So, apples and pears would be something like fire blight is a big one, and apple scab. So those are the big ones I start to look for. Is disease resistance is the first one.
Okay. And you also want to pay close attention to the harvest window, right?
Yeah, for something like strawberries, the window is pretty, the strawberry varieties might produce good for a week, maybe two. And, you don't want to have to, eat strawberries to an extreme level just for 1 or 2 weeks. You want to spread it out so that, you can pick over the course of a few weeks. Same thing with raspberries and so forth. So to me, it's better to get several cultivars rather than one. And I'd say in strawberries too, we get these, sometimes we get a week of really hot temperatures in June, and that can really set back that variety or the yield if you only have the one variety that ripens in that 1 week. So yeah, definitely a harvest window. We like to stagger it a little bit so you can get kind of maximum enjoyment. And, we get burnt out sometimes with picking stuff. And so you're less likely to get overwhelmed all at once to pick.
Okay. Then, of course, it's great if you know what kind of fruit you love, especially when you think about the apple varieties and things like that. But often you are looking at fruit and reading a description of what it tastes like. You're the person who convinced me to plant honeyberries, Randall, having never tasted them ever, for example. So when you read about the taste, what do you look for?
Yeah, I think there's almost like code words almost. If they're calling it exceptional, yeah, it's probably got really good, really excellent flavor. When I read the word good flavor, to me that's kind of like, you go to coffee shop, there's some fancy names for the size of the coffees. There's not a small generally, right? But there is the smallest coffee there, but we don't want to call it small because that implies not as good probably. But so when I just hear the like it's good fruit quality, that's
it means
usually
you
one
won't spit it out.
Yeah, it's okay. You're
Okay.
going to eat it, but you're not going to be like really pumped about, yes, I got this awesome homegrown fruit and it's delicious. It'll be fine, but I look for exceptional or very good or something like that.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that with those descriptions? Because of course, it's going to taste good if it grows well in your environment too. I mean, there are a lot of different factors that go into that. Flavor.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of varieties that are tough to grow but have just outstanding flavor. And I always say, if they're tough to grow but have outstanding flavor, if you don't control the diseases and that kind of thing, they're not going to taste outstanding. And so sometimes you're going to have to sacrifice, the best flavor in the world, so to speak, for disease resistance. And so there's generally a happy medium there. But if you just pick it at the right time, that's half the battle. A lot of the strawberries and raspberries and blackberries in the grocery store. They got to travel quite a ways if they're not locally grown. So they got to pick them a little underripe just to get them to market and last. And so just optimal harvest time is going to help you, even if a cultivar isn't listed as the most outstanding flavor in the world. If you're picking at the optimal time, it's probably going to taste pretty good.
All right. So, of course, homegrown is always better. How about those catalogs? Back to the catalogs. There are so many different options in a catalog. If I buy through a catalog or a mail order business, am I going to get a plant that's going to live? Do I get high quality plants that way?
Yeah, it's hit or miss. There are some, when I've bought from different companies, I've been very happy sometimes and not always happy. So sometimes it's best to maybe if you're going to do a big order, maybe just trial them, the year before and see how they are. I do kind of like buying bare root plants over like a potted tree just because you have a lot more options. So I'll just give you an example. Pears. If you're buying a pear at a potted pear at a box store or whatever, or your local garden center, you'll see the pear variety, but you won't always be able to tell the rootstock on it. And some pears are sold with like a quince rootstock, and quince rootstocks are probably only hard as zone 5, give or take. And if you're in northern Iowa, that's a little iffy. And so you get more details generally if you're buying from a more specialized fruit nursery, so to speak. And you can do a little more research then, in my personal opinion. But cheaper isn't always the better route. Sometimes I'm prone to buying things on sale too and a lower price, but this is a long-term investment. Getting the best quality plant is, and if it costs 30% more, is probably in the long run actually a better deal.
A lot of people want to grow fruit that does not grow reliably in Iowa. How many people do we hear
Yeah.
from who love to grow peaches and rarely get a crop? So, what
Yeah.
fruits are worth taking a risk on, even if they're not 100% reliable here?
Well, if you got limited space, that's probably the biggest question. Is I wouldn't, if you got limited space, I wouldn't do anything that's not reliable. But I look at something like blackberries. You can lay them down and provide some winter protection, and there's just the price of blackberries in the store and the relative ease of growing them in your home garden, assuming you don't buy the thorned ones. No, that's what I'd take the risk on, but I would kind of protect them. So that'd be the one that kind of first comes to mind, just because brambles are so perishable in the store. They got to pick them early, and so you don't get that optimal flavor. So that'd be the first one I would maybe encourage people to try. Peaches take up a lot of space in your yard. I cut open buds, and I have about 30% live buds on my peach trees, and that's not bad. You only need about 10% live buds to get a decent crop. So, but they take up a lot of space, and so if you want to start with something that's marginally hardy in all of Iowa, if we're looking at the whole state, I'd maybe start with blackberries. I wouldn't do the fall blackberries because they need a little bit longer growing season than what we have in a lot of Iowa. But the summer bearing blackberries was what I would roll the dice on first.
All right, that's worth taking a chance on. Randall Vos, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist. For more gardening information and tips, please subscribe to our garden variety newsletter. Find out more at iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. Garden Variety is a production of Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension. It's produced by me, Erin Stile, Caitlin Troutman, and the Iowa Public Radio talk show team. For more garden goodness, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Just go to iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. See you next time.